Hello again everyone, and welcome back to the channel. In today's video we're going to be taking a look at the 16th entry into Asobo's Local Legends series. And the aircraft in question, the aircraft in front of you, is of course the Shorts SC.7 Skyvan. Another rather quirky, unusual, and some would say ugly aircraft available for the sim, which is great to see. This particular aircraft once again developed in collaboration with iniBuilds. The Local Legends series has seen somewhat of a hit and miss run of aircraft previously, so at the end of today's video we're going to take a full look at the product and see whether or not it's worth your money. For our flight today we're going to be taking Nemo out for a spin with a little bit of Caribbean island hopping, carrying out part 2 of a multi-sector day. We're currently on the ground at Saba. We're going to be making a cargo run over towards St. Bart's. As always, I do hope you enjoyed the video. If you do, please consider giving it a like and subscribing to the channel. If you'd like to help support the channel further, you can do so as well by becoming a channel member or patron. So this morning then we find ourselves in the cockpit of Local Legends number 16, which once again is the Shorts SC.7 Skyvan. As discussed, we're now on leg 2 of a 3-part trip. We've just dropped off around 500 kilograms of cargo here at Saba. We've got about another ton to run over towards St. Bart's. You'll notice it is looking pretty gloomy outside. That's not courtesy of the weather. For whatever reason, there is a significant tint on the aircraft windows, which does look a little bit strange. You'll see things are actually much brighter outside. They're just closing up the door again, and you'll notice as well a little bit of a delay there on the animation for the door. Anyway, for the preliminary cockpit preparation checklist, the part brake is set, flight control lock is removed, LP fuel cocks will set the port here through to the port tank, and starboard here through to the starboard tank. The balance cock is selected off. Feather handles are both selected in, external and internal lighting. We've got the nav lights there selected on. We'll take the beacon on here as well ahead of the start. Internal lighting we'll leave as is. Cabin signs are selected on, not really required here for the flight today. Engine start mode switch is set through to normal. Engine master start switches are both selected through to stop. And the ignition and fuel switch again selected through to normal. Internal start power we've got selected there to 24 volts. We're going to be starting off the aircraft batteries. Electrical master switch is set through to internal. Weather radar is selected off, so we can now take the main batteries on. There's the port battery and the starboard. Generator switches are both selected off. Bus bar voltages, we're looking for a minimum of 24 volts. And we're good there on both sides. Ammeters are checked, both indicating 0. And for the inverter control switches, we'll set both of those through to normal. Heating selectors are selected off. Engine bleed switches are selected off. Heater heats are selected off. Same there as well for the airframe de-icing, engine intake anti-icing, and as well for the prop anti-ice just hidden there behind the steering tiller. Windshield wiper switch is selected off. Hydraulic master switch is selected on. We do have a green light. And for the hydraulic pressures, main pressure there indicating 2000 psi, emergency pressure indicator 2500 psi, and on the brakes there about 1000 psi on both sides. In terms of our fuel quantities, we've got about 600 pounds there in each main tank, both on the port and the starboard. Fuel boost pump switches are selected off. Flight instruments, we have a heading of 220 there on the HSI, 220 there as well on the magnetic compass, no lubber line there on the compass, which is a little bit odd. And same on the right. As far as the altimeters go, we've got a QNH of 1007. That's giving us an aerodrome elevation of around 130 feet. And again, we have the same there on both sides. For the central warning and caution panel, we've got generators on both sides, oil pressures on both sides, fuel pressures on both sides, expecting to see all of those. OT gauge, currently showing 30 degrees outside air temperature. And we've got a little mechanical computer here as well for our temperature limits, 30 degrees set, so for the takeoff later on we're going to be looking for a max temperature of 586 and a max cruise temp of 554. Once again, we do have the low oil pressure warnings there, we're expecting to see those. The RPM levers, interestingly the checklist actually calls for them in the taxi position here during the start, as opposed to the start position, but will run as per the checklist. Power levers, it wants half an inch forward, which again seems a little bit strange, but we'll go with the checklist. Flaps we can leave up for now. Emergency hydraulics are once again checked. Autopilot is selected off, trims are checked. For the engine start checklist, The door open warning is extinguished. Bus bar voltages are once again checked. Fuel boost pumps are selected on. Engine start mode switch again set through to normal. Internal start power set through to 24 volts. And we can select the engine 1 master start switch through to start. Okay, so we do now have a good start here on the number 1. All temperature and pressure is checked, and the engine 1 master start switch now set through to run. So we can start the number 2. We'll move the engine 2 master start switch through to the start position. Once again, monitoring the engine here as it runs up. Once we come through 10% here on the fuel flow, we can set the start fuel regulator. Showing rotation, and there's our fuel flow. So just pressing the starboard start fuel regulator. We do have a good light off. So showing ignition. We'll set the engine 2 master start switch back through to run. The engine is now self-sustaining, so just waiting for it to stabilise. And just monitoring the EGT, peaking there around 600 degrees. All temperature and pressure looking good. There we do have 2 good starts for the after start checks. The internal start power switch, once again set through to 24 volts. Engine start mode switch is set through to normal. Electrical master switch is set through to flight. External power supply has been removed. According to the checklist, now we want to bring the power levers up to 80% on the RPM. No mention here of the condition levers, but I find if we do that, we're really going to have to bring the power up to get 80%. So we're going to bring the condition levers up first.
And spacious Martin 210, ready, taxi back to Sable.
And just leave the power levers back at idle.
210, no report.
Again, that might not be accurate, but it seems pretty wrong here sitting on the apron with almost full thrust just to achieve 80% on the RPMs.
Roger, copy the information, and come back to 060 departure for the 210.
So up through 80. The generator switches can now go on. So port and starboard. Voltmeters, we're looking for 27.5 volts, both looking good. And the ammeters are now showing a charge. Flaps, definitely going to need here for the takeoff out of Saba. We'll take flaps 18. And just waiting here for the flaps to run out. Boost pumps are checked on. The central caution and warning panel, all lights are now extinguished. The taxi and lineup checks, taxi clearance has been received, RPM levers. We'll bring back to taxi again, we'll see how the aircraft goes there in the taxi position.
Sir Martin 210, airborne time 32, Sabre 11.
We are going to need to push back here. Pretty limited space to move around the apron, so we'll get the ground cart here to push us back towards the active runway. We're going to be departing off runway 12. There's a significant headwind off the runway, and we're going to need every little bit of wind we can help to get us off the ground here at Saba.
544 station copy. Julian is clearly directed. Papa Juliet Mike VOR, climb maintain 4,000 feet. Walk is 0166.
544 to Julian, we direct Papa Juliet Mike climb 4,000, 0166.
Okay, so we're now lined up on runway 12. Apologies again for the gloominess. I got all the cockpit lighting cranked up. There's not much I can do about that. We're pretty much ready to go for the lineup actions. The trims are set, fuel quantities are checked, fuel boost pumps are on, flaps 18 selected and indicated, flight instruments are checked, ammeters we're looking for below 100 amps there on each side, looking good on both sides. Lineup clearance has been received, navigation lights are selected on, transponder is set through to out, and for the weather radar we're not going to need that here for the flight, but we've got that selected on as well just for demonstration purposes. As far as the takeoff goes then, we're going to depart runway heading out towards 500 feet, then be a left turn onto a heading of 069. It's a pretty short run out to St. Bart's, only around 30 nautical miles. We'll just get ourselves up to around 3,000 feet. We're going to be holding the aircraft on the brakes here as we come up on the power, trying to minimise our takeoff run. Again, a very short runway here out of Saba. Worth noting as well, even with the condition levers there back in taxi, and the power levers all the way back at idle, the aircraft still rather running away during the taxi in terms of power. Anyway, we'll come up on the condition levers through to takeoff and landing. And just wait for things to stabilise. Once again, 30 degrees outside, so we're looking for a max takeoff temp of 586 degrees. We're limited to 64 psi on the torque. Take the park brake off, just hold the aircraft here on the brakes, and just advancing the power levers until we see either 586 here on the temperature gauges or 64 psi here on the torque. Reasonably nice engine sounds on the aircraft overall. Okay, so it looks like we are torque limited here today, 64%, showing around 480, 500 degrees there on the engine temps. Off the brakes then, and away we go. The Skyvan not the quickest aircraft to accelerate, as you can see. We're still fairly heavily loaded. As soon as we come through 80 knots, easing back on the yoke. And just about managing to get airborne there off Saba's incredibly short runway. Again, nice little challenge for the aircraft. So once we come up through 700 feet, we'll start that left turn out towards the northeast. And there's 700, so we'll start a gentle bank now onto our planned heading. We'll just reduce the torque back slightly here to around 60 psi. And RPMs can come back to around 90%. There's not much detail in the manuals about how to actually fly the aircraft, so just using a little bit of guesswork here throughout the flight today. We'll get the nose down here as well. We'll keep the speed around 120 knots out during the climb. And climbing away nicely now, we'll bring the flaps up. Fixed gear here as well on the Skyvan, so we don't have to worry about that. So for the after takeoff checklist, flaps are up, power is set. We'll leave the landing lights on. We're going to be staying down at 3,000 feet, just coming up through 2,000. So far the aircraft feeling reasonably pleasant to fly. It does have a little bit of a tendency to want to auto-rotate during the takeoff if you let the speed build up. But it is a STOL aircraft, so I imagine you wouldn't let the speed get too high during the takeoff. So just getting ready to level off. You can already see our destination off the nose. Excellent visibility today, over 30 miles. Just a shame about that tint, I do find it a little bit overdone. Just kills the vibe a little bit. So we'll get ourselves trimmed out. So far the aircraft easy enough to fly. Max speed there looks to be about 170 knots, so we'll reduce the torque back to around 50 psi here for the cruise.
701, airborne time 48 Juliana, 128.905.
That's looking pretty good now in terms of the speed. And the aircraft nicely in trim. Short leg, but we'll get the autopilot in. So we're coming to heading and out. Engaging the autopilot master. Overall, so far I found the autopilot to do a pretty decent job. Ever so slightly aggressive there on the capture, but I've seen it do better under other circumstances. The props will come back to 84%, that's our min cruise range. And you can see there as we come back on the props, the torque pressure just increasing slightly. So for the cruise checks, the engine parameters are set. In terms of our fuel state now, down to around 500 pounds in each main tank. And again, a very short leg over towards St. Bart's, just off the nose. As usual, we'll take just a very quick opportunity here to head outside the aircraft. Got a little bit of a Caribbean montage for you. Not strictly following the route that we're actually flying, but that'll give us a good opportunity to see a little bit more of the external model, and as well this rather splendid livery. Of course, it's going to be a short, sharp and fun approach into St. Bart's in just a moment's time. We'll be coming in over the hills. And again, I think that'll be a really good test of the Skyvan's performance. Okay, so we are now approaching the island of St. Bart's. Again, a very short hop here over the water. Still maintaining 3,000 feet, but we'll get the aircraft now into a descent, so we'll come out of outs. And just using the autopilot pitch wheel here, we'll go for a descent rate of around 500 feet per minute.
Good afternoon, 902 Mexico.
So the autopilot is pretty basic, but it certainly seems to get the job done. And as I say, works pretty nicely overall. We'll just reduce the power levers now back towards 40 psi on the torque, just to maintain the speed. And pretty much heading directly towards the airfield currently. So out on a easterly heading. We'll track back in for final approach in just a moment. The descent preparation checklist, the engines, again 30 degrees OAT at St. Bart's, so we can use 586 as a reference on the max temp if we need to make a go around. In terms of our fuel quantities, as you'd imagine, we burn through very little fuel en route, so about 500 pounds on each side with the fuel boost pump selected on. Wheel brakes, our checked hydraulic pressures look good. We'll hold the flaps for now, but we'll definitely be taking flaps 50 later on for the landing. Trying to get the aircraft stopped as quickly as we can, so low approach speed for us. The cabin signs are selected on, that is the descent preparation checklist complete. For the landing checks, the landing lights are selected on. Flaps, again we'll hold for now, same for the RPMs. Interestingly, the checklist here calls for the engine bleed air switches to go on. There's been no mention of those so far throughout the flight. To me it seems a little bit counterintuitive that we would take those on ahead of the approach. But again, we'll run as per the checklist. So we'll disengage the autopilot. We'll keep the speed for now. One thing that's certainly true about the Skyvan's flight model, you can get the aircraft slowed down and descending very quickly. Definitely feels like flying brick in that regard. As soon as you take the power off, the speed drops, the aircraft descends. Now that we've taken that bleed on, we've also got the cabin heat warning. Again, with the fact that it's a warning, not a caution, that would suggest to me that I'm probably right in my estimations that we don't want the bleed switches on here during the approach. Typically you want to minimise any bleed air drawn from the engines during a takeoff or an approach, just in case you need full power during the takeoff or for a go-around.
Taxi with Julian and 25.
Just start reducing power slightly, just to increase that descent rate a little bit, and we'll get the speed back towards 140. You can see, even with the descent rate there coming back towards 1,000 feet per minute now, the speed's still rolling off. In terms of the airfield, you probably can't make it out just yet, but you'll see there's a bay just over the other eastern side of the island. The airfield's located down in the bay. We're going to come in over the tops of the hills. For anyone that's familiar with St. Bart's, I'm sure you can probably make out the approach path now.
3006 pickup.
As soon as you even slightly come back off those power levers as well, you need to start trimming. But I've got to say, overall, I rather like the flight model of the Skyvan. It does feel unique. It doesn't feel as though it's got a whole lot of nuance to it. You pretty much just point the aircraft where you want it to go, but certainly a very draggy airframe. And certainly feels like a little bit of a flying brick. Not at all sensitive on the controls, which is great. Just reducing our speed now back towards 120. We'll come through to flaps 18. We're going to hold off on flaps 50 until we're over the top of the hills. Again, that's going to be a lot of drag. Slightly out to the left of the approach path currently, so correcting there.
And Mike Tango, sir.
And we'll come now through to flaps 30. We're going to squeeze in over the tops of the hills as best we can. Back towards 100 knots now on the speed. And we'll let that speed drift back towards 90 knots as we come over the tops of the hills. Again, we don't want to carry any excess airspeed. Though, as you'll see, the Skyvan again will absolutely stop on a dime. Condition levers can come through to the takeoff power setting. And just holding the speed now above blue line.
Good point, Nigel.
So again, flying both the descent rate here and speed all on the throttles. Pitch doesn't seem to have too much effect. Okay, looking good. We'll take flaps 50. Off the power levers. We're not going to finesse the landing here too much. We just want to get the aircraft down and stopped. But as I say, the Skyvan will absolutely stop on a dime. Okay, it's touchdown. Pull beta. Onto the brakes. And we'll backtrack the runway. Vacate off to the left. Okay, so just vacating the runway, we're just going to get ourselves parked up outside of the terminal area.
3000, copy, standing by, release number 54.
Default sounds again there for the taxi, not too surprising for this level of aircraft at this sort of price point. Okay, 38 there, just off the nose, something we still need to fly here on the channel. Onto the brakes, we'll set the park brake. For the parking checks, we need to operate the engines for at least 3 minutes at taxi conditions. We'll say that we've had that now. Park brake is set, boost pumps are selected off, hydraulic master switch is selected off, engine master start switches we can set through to stop.
Station 105, 44, taxiing 6, back to California.
And looks as though we do have 2 good shutdowns. Power levers, apparently we want to set those through to full reverse, which again seems a little bit strange. Inverter control switches are selected off, electrical master switch is selected off, generators are both off, and batteries as well are selected off. Avionics equipment, again, checklist seems a little bit unlikely there. I would have thought we would have turned that off ahead of powering down. Heating and ventilation is selected off. Again, no mention of those engine bleed switches. We'll take those off. Low pressure fuel cocks are selected off. And that is the shutdown checklist complete here on the ground at St. Bart's. So there you go, ladies and gents. Do hope you enjoyed our outing in the Shorts SC.7 Skyvan. Overall, I would say that the aircraft is a fairly nice effort from iniBuilds, and certainly one of the stronger candidates that we've seen as a local legend to date. The add-on, not without its flaws, but do bear in mind the price point. For around £10, we don't expect everything to be perfect. As usual though, I'll just run through a brief breakdown of what I think of the add-on and cover a few topics that we didn't see along the way throughout the video. So starting with the visuals, the texturing and the modelling. As always from iniBuilds, a really solid effort on the external model of the aircraft, a very beautiful rendition of the SC7. Internally as well, the modelling detailing is very nice. Internal texturing is decent, but certainly not some of the best that I've seen in the sim. It is also a little bit hard to gauge the texturing internally, again with that heavy tint on the windows. So externally, the Skyvan looks beautiful, very photorealistic. Internally, again the aircraft is a decent effort, but the visuals probably aren't going to blow you away. The flight modelling on the aircraft overall was a pleasant surprise for me. Although I very much like the flight model of the iniBuilds A300, personally I found the flight modelling on many of iniBuilds' cheaper add-ons to be rather subpar. With the Skyvan you get a flight model which is, again, not overly detailed, but it does feel appropriate, it does feel the part. If you do try and really throw the aircraft around, you will get some strange behaviours. The aircraft will feel pretty lightweight and very pitchy. But using more realistic deflections on the controls, overall as I said, the Skyvan did feel the part. The aircraft felt pretty heavy, was not sensitive on the controls. The aircraft is affectionately named the Flying Shoebox, and the flight model did feel like one of those more or less. As we discussed during the flight, the SC7 is very dependent on power settings. You'll bleed off speed and indeed altitude very quickly, with even a relatively modest reduction in power setting. Overall I would say that the flight model does feel a little bit default in terms of its finesse, but again not generic in terms of how the aircraft handles. Systems depth was once again another pleasant surprise. Overall the aircraft does seem to be pretty much fully functional. A lot of the modelling behind the systems, I think it's fair to say, probably isn't there, so it's very much just click the switch and see the action. But running through the checklist there, pretty much everything seemed to be clickable, and you did get a decent feeling of operating the aircraft. Engine modelling did seem to be pretty basic, but again, for a £10 aircraft, no major complaints on the systems front. The aircraft sounds were a little bit of a mixed bag. The engine sounded decent at certain ranges, but overall there wasn't much range to the sounds. In my opinion, at idle power at least, the aircraft sounded rather underwhelming. In the cruise and during the takeoff, the engine sounded decent enough. One highlight for me though on the sound set, the cockpit sounds were generally excellent. Every switch, every control seemed to have an associated sound, which is always nice to see, and really does help to ramp up the immersion. In terms of extra features, the aircraft was somewhat middle of the road. You do get multiple variants of the Skyvan, which is nice to see, as well as many included liveries. Sadly, but understandably, the real-world liveries associated with the passenger version of the aircraft are included, but lacking any company logos. As you'll have seen from the introduction, the skydiving version as well does come with some onboard skydivers. As best I could tell though, there's no way of dropping those, which is a little bit of a shame. That would have been a really interesting little feature, and I believe technically possible. I gather that Aeroplane Heaven were going to do the same with their C-47, before ultimately releasing the DC-3. As well, we have the ability to select a more modern cockpit by way of installing two GNS 530 units, which can be selected via the onboard tablet. We didn't get a chance to look at the tablet today during the flight, but again the options there are somewhat limited. Essentially you can select the cockpit layout, open the aircraft doors, as well there's a moving map display. It would have been nice to see more made of the tablet, but again it's a fairly cheap add-on. Similarly, it would have been nice to have some external fixtures and fittings. Those have become pretty default in the sim. Included documentation was generally decent. You get a manual that's just shy of 40 pages long. Plenty of information there regarding the aircraft and its systems, although again a little bit vague in terms of how to actually fly the Skyvan. We do also get an included paper checklist as well as the in-sim checklist functionality available with the aircraft. Lastly, touching on the aircraft's FPS. Overall I was getting well above 60 frames per second with the scenario that we ran here today, the same as well with the default Cessna 152. So if nothing else, the Skyvan does appear to be a very frame rate friendly option available for the sim. In conclusion, once again overall I do think that the Skyvan is a pretty solid effort from iniBuilds. Certainly one of their better projects that they've completed on behalf of Asobo thus far. The add-on doesn't really have any specific aspects that set it apart from the competition. Neither though does it have any particularly unpleasant features or characteristics. The Skyvan is a pretty capable machine, there's not too much else like it available at this sort of price for Microsoft Flight Simulator. So whilst the flying shoebox probably isn't going to set your world ablaze, the aircraft is a decent pickup at this sort of price. Once again, ladies and gents, I do hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, please consider giving it a like. If you want to see more content from the channel, then please do consider subscribing as well. And if you'd like to help support the channel further, you can do so by becoming a channel member or patron. I'll leave a link to both of those down in the video description below. Once more, a very big thank you to my channel members and patrons for all of your support. It is very much appreciated. And to all of you, I hope you are having a great day wherever you are. Take really good care, and I will see you all again soon.